Hello everyone, this is TSS Zindabad and today we are going to discuss the daily challenge of Leetcode. Today's question is determine if two strings are close. So let's jump into the problem statement. Two strings are considered close if you can attain one from other using the following operation. Swap any two existing characters. For example, I was given the string A, B, C, D, E. I can swap E with B, right? So that means I can understand that I can only work with existing characters. I cannot add. No new characters can be inserted. Okay. So this is what the first operation is saying to me. Let's see the second operation. It says transform every occurrence of one existing character into another existing character and do the same with other characters. For example, looking at this example, I can see that here I had three occurrences of one occurrence of C, and two occurrences of B. So to convert this string, what I'll do is I'll swap A and B. When I'll swap them, I'll get three occurrences of B, one occurrence of A, and two occurrences of C. So here what I can see is that I'm again working only with the existing characters. No new characters have been introduced. And something like a frequency swap is occurring here. So this question has been marked as medium on Leetcode, but this question is very easy and you'll understand it when we'll jump into the approach of how this intuition to solve this problem can be developed. Let's look at what finally do we need to do. Use the above operations on either string as many times as necessary. Given two strings, word 1 and word 2, return true if word 1 and word 2 are close, else return false. So we have understood that we'll be given two strings, right? First is the word 1 string, other is the word 2 string. I need to tell that if they are close. And by close, I mean that I can attain one from the other string. So in the question that we have done recently, therein we just the ordering did not matter. The question, daily challenge question that we did yesterday, in that ordering did not matter. But in this case, the ordering matters. It needs to be exactly the replicate of what string you're choosing to convert into the other. Okay. And you need to do that using these operations. And from these operations, what two basic things we have understood is first is that we have to just work with the existing characters. And second, that there needs to be a frequency swapping when we talk about the existing characters swapping. Okay. So now let's talk about the approach. When we talk about the approach, let's take an example to understand how the above operations can be implemented for solving this problem. Okay, so this is the example. The word 1 that has been given to me is CABBBA, and the word 2 is ABBCCC. Two things to keep in mind is first, work only with the existing characters. No new character, that means no new character can be introduced. You have to just use the ones that you have. Second, frequency swapping will occur when you are swapping the existing characters. So these are the two basic ideas that we have discussed. Okay. So what we understand here is that I need to see one thing, that I can choose anyone. I can choose either the first word 1 string or word 2 string, and I can convert either one of them into the other. So what I'll do is, for this example, I'll say, okay, let's try converting the string that is word 1 into word 2. You can even do the vice versa, that is still applicable. So what first thing that comes into my mind is that again and again the question is focusing upon the existing characters that you have to work with, only the existing characters, only the existing characters. So I understand one thing, that for word 1 to be converted into word 2, and for me to use just the existing characters, I cannot have any character in word 1 which is not present in my word 2, right? Which is not present in word 2. If this occurs, that means I have introduced a new character which is not there in my word 2, and I do not have any existing operations for me to tackle that problem. So I'll simply return a false in this case, that no, they are not close. So this is the first condition that we'll need to code up when we'll be working with the code. Okay. The second thing that I understand is, from the second operation, that something like frequency swapping needs to occur. So what is frequency swapping? Let's understand that. Here you can see that in the case of word 1, let's write the alphabets and the corresponding frequency. I can see that C occurs once, A occurs twice, B occurs thrice. Okay. And talking about word 2, which is my goal word, we can say, the one I really want to achieve. So alphabet and frequency, I get, I can see that C occurs 3 times, A occurs once, B occurs twice. So I understand that the frequency is also following some sort of a pattern only, right? Because if you see that we have one here, we have one here, we have two here, we have two here, we have three here, we have three here. And for me to get my desired string, which is A, B, B, triple C, from word 1, that is C, A, triple B, A, I can see that I can get it if, I'll simply start applying the operations on my word 1. So I understand that I do not explicitly go and perform these operations. I can simply work with these frequencies and this condition of occurrence of any new character, which is not there in my destination word, we can say, right? The word that I want to achieve, or we can say the goal word, whatever you prefer. Okay. So these are the two conditions I'll be working with. So when we talk about characters, or when we talk about frequency, with frequency it can be anything. It can be characters, it can be numbers itself, it can be any sequences. Whenever we talk about frequency, the first data structure that comes into my head is hash maps, right? So I'll say, okay, I can use a hash map, I can keep a frequency, or the other vector, or the other data structure that comes into my head is vectors, right? That I can simply have two vectors, and I'll try figuring out how I can apply these two conditions that I have just mentioned to you and I've discussed, and how can I use it with vectors. In this case, I'll be using a vector for developing this approach and solving the problem. So what I can do is, I'll say, okay, what do you do is you create two vectors, right? And you create it of int type. So let's create two vectors. And what I'll do is I'll initialize them with 26, 0. That means 26 is the size of character, right? And 0 means that initially my vector will have 0 at every index. So I can assume like I have something like this big vector v1 and 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on up to 26. And here everywhere I have got zeros fit, right? All these places they have 0. And similarly for v2, again I have a this big vector of 26 size, and what I am doing is I am initializing 0 on every index, right? So now what I'll do is I'll simply iterate over my strings. I'll rewrite my strings here. The word 1 is CA triple BA, and my word 2 is A double B triple C. Okay, so A double B triple C, and I'm trying to convert word 1 into word 2. So what I'll do is I'll first of all iterate over my first word, right? So I'll say let's iterate over the first word, that is C A B B B A 0 1 2 3 4 5. I am here. I'll say so when I'm on the zeroth index, my iterator is here. What I'll simply do is I'll say whatever is its value minus the character A. So character A represents 0, and here I have, as I have C, so C's number is 2. So I'll get 2. I'll go to the index 2 and I'll update it by 1. That okay, that C occurs, and what is the occurrence? The occurrence is 1. So I can see that using this one vector, I can store two things. The first is the frequency of the characters, and the second thing is I can know if a character exists or not in the string. And how can I know it? I can know it if its frequency is greater than 0, then I'll say yes, it is in my string. So my iterator moves forward. I come to A. So 0 minus 0 will become 0. I'll say okay, increment this. Then I'll go to position 2. I get a B. So B is 1 minus 0. We get a 1. We'll increment this to 1. We'll go to the next index. We again get a B. So this gets incremented to 2. We again go to the next index, we get a B. We'll again increment it in my vector V1. Then I'll again move my iterator over the word 1 string, and I get a A this time. Now I'll say okay, increment it. So I get 2. So now my V1 becomes 2, 3, 1, and all of the rest are 0. And similarly for my word 2, which is A double B triple C. So what I'll do is my iterator would be on the 0th index for my word 2 string. It will say whatever is there on the 0th index incremented. For B, as I have shown you, that we'll get 1 as the answer after performing this operation. So I'll increment it. Then again my iterator moves forward. The value gets incremented. We go to the next position, we get a C. So 2 gets in position 2 for my vector V2 gets incremented, it becomes 1. We move forward, the value becomes 2. We again encounter C, so it becomes 3. So now this array, as I've told you, is giving me two things. The first one is the frequency of characters, and if a character is present or not in a string. And this is what I wanted. This is what I wanted so as to fulfill these two above conditions that I talked about. So this is the approach for the problem. Okay, so we have discussed the approach in quite detail. Now let's dry run this for an example, right? So now what we'll do is we can have word 1 string as A and word 2 string as double A, right? So what I'll do is I'll have a V1 character which is of length 26 and it is initialized to 0, right? 26, 0. When I say 26 here, it will have characters that are 0 to 25, right? And 0 here is for A and 25 is for Z when we'll be storing it. When I told you that we'll be using something like word I minus the character A, this is corresponding to it. Okay. So now what I'll say is, okay, we'll quickly create another vector V2 so that we can store the word 2 characters and their frequencies. So I'll have something like this 26 length, everything is initialized to 0, right? Similarly here, everything is initialized to 0 and it is still 25. So what happens is, here I'll come here, I'll say, okay, as word of I minus character A. So we know word of I is word 1 I. That means I is 0 here, right? It is A. A minus A will be 0. So this gets incremented to 1. This string gets exhausted. We go to the next string. Here we have initialized another vector for the purpose of storing the frequency and the presence of a character of word 2. So here what I'll say is I'll be on the 0th index. Using this, we'll have word 2 here. So A minus A becomes 0. We'll say increment whatever is on the index 0 for the vector v2. It becomes 1. My iterator moves forward. We again get the A. It increments to 2. Now, this is something we have discussed so far. Now, so as to understand that when we have to return a true or when do we have to return a false, there needs to be two checks. Okay. So what are these two checks? The first check that we need is that if there is a new character. For example, while after making these two vectors, right, we have to perform these steps. I'll say there was supposedly, I had something like AB and I was trying to convert word 1 into word 2, right? So here, then I would have had 1 here as well, right? In my V1 vector for the first index. But I see that the for my V2 vector, which is representing my goal word or my destination word, that is something I require, that here we have a 0. That means my goal word does not have this particular character. So in that case, I have come across a new character. In that case, I need to return a false. Okay. And the second check that I need to keep is that the frequency, for example, it is not important that the frequency would be similar for each. It is not important that the frequency will be similar for each character, right? It is not going to be like that if in my word 1 I have A as 2, in my word 2 also I'll have A as 2. I might have B as 2 and I have 1 A, A's frequency as 1 and B's frequency as 1 here in word 1, right? So the order of frequency does not matter, but as a whole complete frequency matters. So what I'll do is I'll sort the arrays, both my vectors v1 and v2, and I'll simply return that if they are equal, this will cater two things. What? That first one is the size of strings would be handled by itself. Second thing that it will cater to is that I will know that, okay, now I have these, if I sort it, I'll get something 1, 2 and I'll get something 1, 2. And I can see that yes, these two vectors v1 and v2 now become similar and they will return a true. But if I was not sorting them, I had something like 2, 1 and I had something like 1, 2 for vector v2. So these are not equal, right? So I would have returned a false. So this is the approach. Now let's quickly code this up. Okay. So this is the problem. Let's start coding using the approach that we have just discussed. I'll create a vector v1, 26 is the size, initialize it to 0. And I'll create a similar vector v2 for my second string, that is word 2. What I'll do is I'll simply run a for loop word1 dot length I plus plus, and I'll say that you need to put it on the index word1 I minus the character A and increment it. And we can use a similar loop for filling my second vector, that is v2, which is corresponding to the string word 2. Now we have two vectors v1 and v2. The first one is storing the character frequency and number of characters which are present, which character is present in my string, the first string. And similarly, I have this for the second string. Now, after this, what I'll do is I'll say that what you need to figure me out is that if at any point of time you see that there is a certain character in my string word 1 which is not in my word 2. So for that, I'll simply run a loop for v1 dot size I plus plus. I'll say if v1I is greater than 0 and if v2I is less than 0, return a false. So it is saying that in my word 1, I have this character, but in my word 2, I do not have this character. So you need to return me a false because we have encountered a new character. Else, what we'll do is we'll simply sort both the arrays and I'll copy paste this. Here needs to be a comma. I have sorted the first vector. Let's sort the second vector and we'll simply return v1 equals to v2. I hope this should work fine. Let's quickly run it once. It is working fine. Let's submit it. Okay. Now, okay. So this is the error that we have encountered. Why did we get this? Is because we've written less than 0. We have to write less than equal to 0 because it will never be less than the 0. Because we're not decrementing what we have. We are just not incrementing it. If it is not there, the correct is not there. And yes, it works fine now. So let's talk about the time and space complexity. I'll quickly copy paste this code. Okay, so this is the code that we have written for this problem. Let's first talk about the time complexity. So here I can see that I'm running this loop for the length of word 1. So if this is n, this is running for O of n time because I'm going to every character and I am incrementing the value in my word 1, in my vector 1 corresponding to the word 1 strings character. For my second loop, it is running for length of word 2 string, right? Let us assume it is m. So it is O of m. Then again, I'm running O of m loop. And for sorting this, here you need to understand that both my V1 and V2 are of constant space complexity because I've mentioned that they have only 26 elements in them, right? So this becomes a constant function as a whole because what happens is we know that the sort function has in general a time complexity of O of n log n, right? But here, because we have mentioned the number of elements, it simply becomes O of n. So therefore, what we can say is, we can say that for any string whose length is greater, right? That means if word 1 string's length is greater, and this is n, right? Considering this, so we can say the time complexity as a whole becomes O of n for this code. Now let's talk about the space complexity. Here you can see I'm creating two vectors, but again they are of constant space. So in this case, I have O of 1 as the space complexity. I hope this solution is clear to you. Thank you for viewing the video till the end. Please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.